Here's a couple of my favorite books: Planet of Judgment and World Without End, both written by the noted science fiction author Joe Haldeman. Um, and the two Star Trek novels he did. Um, I am going to say 1978. Let's see. This is a second printing from 1977. And that was Planet of Judgment, the first of the two. The second one was World Without End, and a Bantam book from 1979. And other printings of these books had um, other covers as well. So these are available on the used book market in a variety of covers. Um, some covers are more Star Trek-y than others. World Without End, it looks like kind of a generic cover. You can find them with, actual Star Trek stuff on it. So, but, this is the one I've always owned since these came out in the late 70s, and I just love them. So once again, it's a case where I would never give these books up, even if they come out electronically, which they never have. Initially, it was Bantam Books that had the contract to do Star Trek novels. It was Bantam that did the James Blish short story adaptations of the original series episodes. They did Blish's novel Spock Must Die. And they did some other novels, as long as also a short story anthology called The New Voyages. Now, eventually, that Star Trek contract went to Pocketbooks. And I think the first pocketbook was the novelization of Star Trek The Motion Picture by Gene Roddenberry. And after that, they did more novelizations. They occasionally did something based on like a Next Generation episode or a Deep Space Nine episode directly, an adaptation of that. Most of them were original stories. And it got to be where there were hundreds of Star Trek novels out there. It was hard to tell which ones were good and which ones were bad, because personal tastes vary. And, I would buy a Star Trek novel from an author I wasn't familiar with, and I might or might not like it. Um, I will say one of my favorite authors of newer Star Trek novels is Greg Cox, who's done a number of really fun, excellent ones. And I will still try one every once in a while. It's like the particular theme of a novel sounds good. I've mostly stuck with original series novels because that's just my Star Trek wheelhouse. I have occasionally bought a Next Generation novel. I have one on my Kindle, a Deep Space Nine novel revolving around a massive poker game, which I just think is a cool idea. I haven't read it yet, though, and I'm afraid I don't recall the title or the author right off. But these are the two Bantam books from the original set of Star Trek novels that came out in the 1970s, and they haven't been reprinted, and they're not available electronically. And well, that's the way the world works. I assume there's rights issues that just nobody's ever bothered working out. So they're both fun novels. The first one was Planet of Judgment, and it was, I have a nostalgic fondness for it. But even taking that into consideration, I think it's an excellent, strong story that captures the personalities of Kirk and Spock and McCoy. And what's interesting that in the foreword or afterword of his second novel, probably an afterword. Let me see. Or his author's notes. I think he mentions that he was overseas in Vietnam when the show originally aired. And so he contracts to write a couple of Star Trek novels, and you can't just send them videotapes. People don't own VCRs yet. So, it's all predates that. So he wrote, it was either in that after notes or somewhere else that I read it, that his background information comes largely from James Blish's short story adaptations of the episodes. And there's a few elements in Planet of Judgment that also indicate to me that he was using the Starfleet technical manual that was in print at the time for some of his references. There is a reference, for instance, to characters on the bridge taking a gangway down to one of the labs on the on like deck 2 or 3 or 4, wherever the labs were, according to the old blueprints. And that gangway does exist on the blueprints of the bridge in the technical manual, and also in the full blueprints of the Enterprise that was available at that time. And he uses a destroyer, which was a saucer with a single warp nacelle and no secondary hull, is another ship that shows up, and it's described exactly the way it is in the technical manual, and the name of the ship is the same as one of the destroyers listed in the list of ships in the technical manual. So I'm pretty sure he did use the technical manual when he did these, and I think that's just for those of us who really geek out on that stuff. And I will put a link below to the video I did about the tech manual. That is just, it's fun. It just adds to the pleasure of these. The Planet of Judgment, the main plot involves a planet that seems to defy physics and a powerful alien race, which are all over the place in the Star Trek universe, with enormous mental powers. Kirk and a number of the crew end up trapped on the planet and only gradually find out what the aliens have in mind. And there's a really intense climax that has Kirk and Spock in mental duels with members of yet another powerful alien race. The duels involve illusions, such as Kirk commanding a sailing ship, fighting pirates, or Spock swimming inside a sun with the purpose of causing it to go nova. It's all an illusion, but losing still means real-life death. McCoy gets a preliminary duel against one of these aliens, where he finds himself on a 19th century riverboat in a poker game that spirals into bizarre and lethal chaos. It's really a fun novel. Handles the science fiction concepts intelligently, because Haldeman is one of the best hard science fiction writers. And there's also really a favorite part in this, a character moment, separate from the main plot. And it comes when Spock is discussing Nurse Chapel's crush on him with McCoy. Why, Spock asks, would Chapel pursue a relationship that would, because of Vulcan biology, be one of almost complete abstinence? Ponfar only comes once every 7 years. And McCoy points out that Spock's own mother was human. She made that decision. Mother and I have never discussed this frankly, says Spock. That's the most human thing I've ever heard you say, replies McCoy. So, great world building, a great plot. I believe that Haldeman really does catch the personalities of the main crew properly. The story moves along at a brisk pace. It's a very short novel, but it tells its story well. 151 pages to tell the whole story, but it works really well. It captures the camaraderie of the crew and the desire to explore strange new worlds. It's a novel I revisit from time to time, because I think it's a great novel, and because it's a way of spending time in one of my favorite fictional universes. I will say, by the way, that more modern shows have, I guess, I don't watch the modern stuff. I've only seen bits and pieces of them. I guess they've established that Vulcans can have physical relationships in between bouts of Ponfar. And I also know that there is a novel by D.C. Fontana, she was one of the original Star Trek writers, and she's a brilliant writer. Amongst the episodes she wrote was Journey to Babel, where we meet Spock's parents. And she played, because of the key episodes she wrote, she played an important part in defining the Star Trek universe and helping it make it the classic series it is today. Now, she wrote a novel set in Captain Pike's time. This was years ago, before the series Strange New World, so it was unusual to get a Captain Pike novel that I read and I enjoyed. And she had Spock in a relationship with a lady Vulcan, and they could have physical relationships in between Ponfar. So when I say I think that that's a mistake, and that Vulcans only being able to do that during Ponfar helps make them alien and separates them from humans. They're no longer just emotionless humans with pointy ears. They have an aspect to them that is truly alien. So I prefer Haldeman's interpretation, but I realize that I am disagreeing with one of the top Star Trek writers of all time and someone who would know this universe much better than I ever would. So there you go. Anyway, then we get to World Without End, the second of his two novels. And remember that he used Blish's short stories to research rather than watching the episodes. And so he might not have been aware that in very, very general terms, he was reusing a plot from a third season episode, For the World is Hollow and That I Have Touched the Sky, in which the inhabitants of a giant spaceship don't know they're in a spaceship. But other than that, there is that similarity. Other than that, Haldeman does original world building, and it's not at all like the TV episode, other than that basic premise. The inhabitants this time are very, very alien. They have a very bizarre society. I don't want to try and summarize it because it would make this review too long, and I don't want to spoil learning about it yourself if you read this for the first time at any point. So he creates, as Spock would say, a fascinating alien society. He also involves the Klingons in this one. And remember, this was written in a time when the original series was the only source for Klingons. We didn't have a lot of detail, and we didn't have the honor-based society that was established later on in The Next Generation. So Haldeman takes them in a unique direction. He creates a particularly brutal version of them, including a priest class on the ship that can demand limbs or even heads be taken and sacrificed from crew members. He then adds a ship's captain who might be a little too human in his attitudes towards throwing away the lives of his crew. The main plot involves Kirk and a landing party getting stranded in the alien ship when they discover that the transporters only work in one direction. Then starting a long journey to the spherical ship's pole where ruling magicians live, dealing with the gradual reduction in gravity as they near their goal, because this big ship simulates gravity via rotation and centrifugal force. In the meantime, the Enterprise is trapped near the alien ship with its power being drained. Once again, Haldeman catches the personalities of Spock and Kirk and the other Enterprise crew quite well. I especially like scenes with Scotty, who ends up alone on the Enterprise, unable to transport himself down to this ship after the rest of the crew has done so, surviving on the emergency bridge as the ship loses power by using a campfire, oxygen bottles, and some brandy. Great moments also include a scene in which one of the aliens asks one of the humans to demonstrate a phaser by shooting one of the alien's bodyguard. It's not a problem, says the alien. They're only security, which causes the two red shirts in the landing party to exchange glances. I enjoy a very annoyed McCoy's explanation to an alien about the differences between men and women amongst humans. Girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice, while boys are made of snakes and snails and puppy dog tails, only for the alien to tell him that most of those words did not translate. There's several great action scenes, and it's a satisfying if bizarre resolution to the story at the climax. And once again, I love it. Of the two, I think I would say Planet of Judgment is my favorite of the two, but that's very much a subjective call, probably just because it's the one I read first. They're both great novels. They're both a ton of fun. I read them for the umpteenth time last year. I'll read them again eventually before long. Just once again, a way of visiting one of my favorite fictional universes, a way of revisiting this nostalgia of reading a new Star Trek story when such things were very rare, and just an appreciation of good storytelling. So Planet of Judgment, World Without End, both by Joe Haldeman. If you see them in a used bookstore, snatch them up, especially if you're a Star Trek fan. They're worth reading.